How early are Paul's epistles, and how do they confirm the resurrection?
Now, in an earlier question, we discussed, quote-unquote, Paul's epistles. There's 13 of them that bear his name. And to me, positively, when you're talking to unbelievers, atheist New Testament scholars, like Garrett Ludeman, Bart Ehrman, agnostic New Testament scholars, Jewish but still New Testament scholars, like Geza Vermesh and Pinchas Lapid, they are going to concede 7 of the 13. But what's amazing about the 7 is that if a Christian wanted to do a study on Paul's best-known epistles, they're going to name these. The 7 they concede are the best-known epistles of Paul. So real quickly, those 7 are Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, the first 4, then Philippians is 5, 1 Thessalonians is 6, and Philemon is 7. So once again, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, Philemon, 7. And that's why when we do an apologetic talking about Galatians 1 and 2 and Paul's trips to Jerusalem, that's the genre in which those fit. Galatians 1 and 2 are like 1 Thessalonians, 1 Corinthians, uncriticized. Philippians, just there. Now, the earliest of these 7, the earliest of all Paul's epistles, but the earliest of the 7 that the critics allow is 1 Thessalonians. It's usually dated in 50 AD. And that's, now every once in a while you find somebody says 48, but 50 AD. And what's nice about that is that's a nice round 20 years. We can keep this to nice measuring. 50 minus 30 for the crucifixion is 20 years later. And then we have 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. We've defined the gospel at a minimum. These are the gospel data at the minimum of deity, death, resurrection. Deity, death, resurrection. You want the full answer? Deity, as in Son of God, Lord, seated on the right hand of God, all of that prominent. Death, you would say died for our sins according to the scriptures. That's 1 Corinthians 15 creed. And then resurrection, he rose and appeared. And that's the 3 unpacked. Then, of course, the question is, do you want to get married? Do you want to come to Jesus? And by the way, in 2 Corinthians, Paul uses this language. He said, I tried to marry you to Jesus as his spotless bride. I thought, wow, Paul wants to marry the Corinthians to Jesus. That's I do. So then we have a commitment, better or worse, rich or poor, till death do we part. That's what Christians say to Jesus. Okay. Now, when these epistles start, the martyrdom of Paul is usually put at about 63 AD, give or take a year. Martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, we know from Josephus, 62. Paul and Peter, probably about 63. So we have the martyrdom of those 3, 62, 63, maybe someone's going to say 64. Now that's at plus 32 to 34. So that gives you some dates. Now, one thing that's amazing, your question was evidence for the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15 includes that incredible creed. 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul starts with a footnote. Paul says, I gave you what I was given. I gave you what I was given. If this were a research paper today and you didn't put a footnote there, the professor would write in the margin, hey, you said this was from somebody else. Who's it from? When? And what page number? Okay, well, Paul's telling you got it from somebody else. That's a major passage on resurrection. Another one, Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth, or if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, deity, and believe in our heart that God's raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Deity, resurrection, death. That's the order there. And just a few verses later, verse 13, Paul explains what he means by the word Lord, because Lord can mean master, Lord can mean sir, but could also mean the God of the universe. And just 4 verses later, Paul quotes the Old Testament, whoever calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. You go, well, that sounds like Paul. Well, it is Paul, but Paul's quoting the Old Testament. It's an Old Testament quote. The Old Testament talked like whoever called on the name of the Lord should be saved. But Lord there is Yahweh.
Okay.
Lord there is the holiest name for God. So in Romans 10:9, you've got deity, death, and resurrection. Here's another one. Romans 1, 3, and 4. Jesus showed himself to be the Son of God. 3 titles. Jesus showed himself to be Christ, Messiah, Son of God, and Lord by virtue of his resurrection from the dead. That's Romans 1, 3, and 4. So just right there, I've just repeated some of the creeds. Also, Romans says that he died and was raised for our justification. That's another creed in the book of Romans. So you've got the Romans creed, you've got that big one in 1 Corinthians 15. If you back up 4 chapters, that's the other passage where Paul says, I have a footnote. I gave you, which I also received from the Lord. And that's the Lord's Supper. And now Paul doesn't mention resurrection there. He said he's the Lord, and he died for us. But then he said, when you celebrate this, you celebrate the Lord's death until he comes. So obviously the Jesus who is Lord and who died there, because it's the communion you're celebrating, not Easter Sunday, but the communion you're celebrating is until the Lord returns. So he's alive. He's alive there. Okay, one more thing. 1 Thessalonians is the earliest epistle. When Paul starts 1 Thessalonians, it's loaded, and so are those other epistles, with high Christology, Son of God, Lord. It's loaded with high Christology. But when that book came out in 50 AD, written to Gentiles, and Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki as they say today, but Thessalonica, Paul just pops up with these big titles. He doesn't stop and defend them. They already knew what they were because these creeds had been around. So there's some early things on the 7 epistles of Paul and the greater 13 on deity, death, resurrection.